Reloading match ammo, step number 2, cleaning your brass. So my story with cleaning brass for reloading is probably very similar to a lot of you. First thing you get is a vibratory tumbler like this, and some corn cob, and you're perfectly good with that. It works perfectly well. And then you start hearing things and reading things online about ultrasonics and wet tumbling, stainless steel media, things like that. Well, same thing happened to me. So I went down the pathway of wet tumbling for a while. Bought a cheap Harbor Freight rock tumbler. Did that for a little while, and it definitely cleaned. It cleaned very well. So then I upgraded to the Frankfurt Arsenal rotary tumbler and used that for a number of years. And like I said, it cleans. Until one day I was at a match. I was talking to another shooter, and I was talking about how I was having some trouble with some higher SDs than I wanted, and wouldn't mind getting the groups a little smaller, things like that. And so we were just talking about generally what my reloading practices were. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Everything seemed good, until finally he just looked at me and said, "How are you cleaning your brass?" I said, "I'm wet tumbling." And he said, a lot of people do that, but I think it's a mistake. It tends to clean too much, especially in the neck. So inside that neck, you get a little bit of carbon buildup, and a lot of people think it's actually beneficial. I am now one of those people. But to continue my story, I went home. I said, well, I got to test this. So I got out the wet tumbler, got out the dry tumbler, and I did, a test against each other. And then I did it again, and then I did it again. Why did I do it so many times? Because I was a little surprised at the result. The dry tumbling had significantly lower SDs and smaller groups. So after it was repeated numerous times, I switched over. And now I do all my dry tumbling for precision match ammo. I still use the wet tumbler for 9mm, 223 plinking rounds, things like that. But I have switched back to the vibratory tumbler. What kind of media? There's another thing. I had to test that too. There is a group chat that a bunch of my friends and I are on, and we pass along information back and forth. And so when I was trying to figure out what kind of media to use, because people were talking about different things, and so I did a test on a whole bunch of different things, and I recorded the results in a screencast, and I'm going to play that for you right here because I think that's easier than me going over it again. Let's start off with looking at the control, which is the dirty brass. I took photos afterwards of different positions. I used a macro lens on my camera so I can get some pretty good detail pretty close up. So this is front shot. You can see it's pretty dirty. You can also see that I do mark my brass with a green Sharpie. And so it'll be interesting to see how that is taken off or not, but definitely dirty here. You'll see a little bit of some of the dirt on the inside. I actually like to keep a little bit of that. So on its side, and then with a flashlight pointed at so we can see a little bit better inside the primer pocket. And as you can see, it's pretty dirty. All right, so the first thing I tried was something new. We've talked about it a good bit in some of our private message groups. So this is long grain rice. It's supposed to be got some benefits of no dust. That is definitely true. It is not dusty at all. And you can see this rice has been used. It's got some dirt in it. So the brass, for the most part, is pretty clean. I'm perfectly happy to use that brass. There might be a little bit left over in the cracks and crevices. It is definitely not shiny, is what I would call more of a matte finish, but is still relatively clean. Primer pockets, it looks like a couple pieces chipped off, but for the most part, primer pockets are still pretty dirty. But again, not something I worry about a lot. The next one is a sweet rice I got at an Asian market. You can see it's a good bit longer or good bit shorter and thicker. It does not get in the primer pockets. The long grain rice would occasionally get stuck in the primer pockets. That's why I went to this to try something else. And I was disappointed. So first thing you can see is that sweet rice must have some kind of sugars on the outside of it or something, but they all gunked up a good bit right here. And you can see it more there. Still didn't clean all of this. Very dirty here. This actually had to be wiped off. It was a buildup and not good. It didn't do anything at all inside the primer pocket. So sweet rice is way off the list. The long grain I would still use. It's not real shiny, but it's not dusty at all. So sweet rice is out. The next one is one I a couple years ago learned about on a forum online. People talked about this Russian buckwheat. You can see it's a good bit bigger. It will occasionally get stuck in the primer pocket, not down in the flash hole itself, but in the pocket. It's really easy to get off if need be. You can just kind of knock it out either with a depriming dye or a lot of times with your fingernail. This stuff does fairly well. Here's a picture of it. This is what I bought off Amazon. Pretty inexpensive too. It is not very dusty. It does build up dust after a little while, but I would not consider it terribly dusty. You can see it does a pretty good job cleaning. Not perfectly clean, but definitely usable, and I have used this for quite a while. Again, it's not a bright and shiny clean, but it is definitely clean and usable. And primer pockets, I guess it's probably pretty similar to the rice in that it doesn't really get in there and do much. But again, I think it's pretty usable. Now the next thing is an Ultrasonic. This is the one I happen to have. It is a cheap Harbor Freight one. It is the plastic kind. It only runs 8 minutes at a time. So in order to do this test, which I ran for an hour and a half, so I had to run it numerous times. This is the Lyman Ultrasonic, so it's a gun brand one. It's really the same thing. But I ran this for an hour and a half, and you can see on the Ultrasonic, it gets cleaner up here, but it always turned the necks kind of a funky pink. You can see it's also getting cleaner inside. Almost too clean for me. It does clean a good bit on the bottom. Again, fairly clean. I think the splotchiness may be partially because I did not dry it in a dehydrator this time. I just set it upside down in a case holder, like you get pistol ammo in, and let it air dry. So maybe that is part of the reason. And of course, it has the cleanest of the primer pockets. Still not 100% clean, but pretty clean. I do think that a commercial ultrasonic would clean better than this one, and it would be easier to use. But I also noticed on these that depending on if they were standing up or they were laying down, they kind of cleaned differently. And I think if you use an ultrasonic, you'd be well off to kind of stir it at least halfway through and see what happens. So then we go to Walnut Shell. The Walnut Shell that I got, is Gilla Reptile bedding. Got it at the pet store. It's pure English walnut, and I think it was a pretty good size. It was fairly inexpensive, and so I tried it with the walnut and later on the corn cob. People talk about them being dusty. So when I ran these, I did used dryer sheets in them, and the walnut shell was the dustiest. It When you pull the dryer sheets out, you could see that kind of orangey discoloration that is in here, and I think the more you use it, the more it'll break down. It was not overwhelming to me if you use the dryer sheet. I think it would be perfectly usable. And so here is what it looked like. You can see it is pretty clean. I didn't mention before, all of these dry tumbles are only 2 hours. Ultrasonic was 1.5 hours, but the dry tumbles were only 2 hours. I think 3 hours would make a lot of these even better, but I wanted to just keep it something consistent. So that is more of the walnut shell. You can see that is pretty darn clean. Little bit of discoloration up here. I think part of that is also from the annealing process. So I don't think that is all as cleanable as it could be. This is the primer pocket. You can see it doesn't do much to the primer pockets. They're still pretty dirty. Again, that doesn't bother me a lot. So the next thing I did was I added some car wax to it. A lot of people say it makes things shinier. I definitely think it did. You can see on this one and this one, I definitely think they got shinier. A little less matte, a little bit more brassy colored, and I think it doesn't hurt to have the wax in it. And primer pocket was just about the same. The last one was corn cob. I was going to get some pet bedding again, which they do have corn cob of that, and pet store didn't have it. I went to Academy and got the Hornady brand of corn cob. It's very, very light stuff, but I actually liked it quite a bit. Let's see. All right, so this is the corn cob Hornady. Cleaned it pretty darn well. Maybe a little bit of buildup still there. Let's see on the side. Yeah, maybe a little bit of buildup. Another hour, I think it would be gone. It's probably not as aggressive as the walnut, but it did a nice job. Primer pockets, kind of nothing. Again, I did corn cob with wax in it.
believe it or not, it seemed to do a little better cleaning even. Took off some of that was on the other one. And that is a pretty darn clean piece of brass. And again, primer pockets, not really showing much. Showing these all to other people and saying which one do you think was the cleanest. Corncob with wax was usually picked as the cleanest. With, let's see if I can find it, the Walnut Shell with wax, them being kind of neck and neck.
Isn't it funny how things come full circle? I start off with vibratory tumbler, with corncob media, and that's right where I've ended back up again. And maybe the old timers knew something and passed along the good information. So right now it's time to clean the brass. My media is a little dirty, probably could go longer, but let's start from scratch so I can show you my process about how I take corncob media, get the wax in it, and then get the brass cleaned in there for a couple of hours. All right, here's the corncob media in my vibratory tumbler. This is actually just a cheap Frankfurt Arsenal tumbler. I'd like to look into some others at some point, but this has worked all right. And this media has probably been in there, oh, I don't know, somewhere between 6 months and a year. And you can see it's dirty. This is what brand new media looks like. So you can see that it is definitely dirty. So we're gonna put some brand new stuff in there. We'll dump this out. All right. It's usually about how high I like it. That should work. The next thing we're going to put it in is some car wax. Some people use flits, I know. I've always used this new finish. And I put a healthy amount in, and then I'm going to put it in to run. And I'm now going to let that run for at least a couple hours. And I want to get that wax circulated throughout all the media and make sure that it is evenly dispersed, and then we'll add our brass. So the brass is done tumbling, 2 hours, and it is looking really good. Definitely looking good. So normally what I would do is dump it into this RCBS media sifter, and it's been all right, but I just got a new one, the new Hornady one here, and I am way happier with it. This one is a little bit more difficult to use, and so let me slide it out of the way. And this Hornady one is nice in that it, first of all, it locks. So when you take the top off, and you take the top off, it sits there, it doesn't move. So it's locked in. So pour that in. Line all that back up, put the top back on. Now we flip the handle out and now it's not locked anymore. And we spin it a bit. Important thing is to not just spin it continually, or else you could actually, by centrifugal force, keep all the media up inside the brass. You need to vary it. So don't spin it too fast. That should do it. We'll lock that back. And now we have all our brass nice and clean, ready to go. That actually looks really, really good. So I'm very happy with that. And we'll move on to our next step. Next step being annealing.